In the Trump administration today, there's a whole new attitude when it comes to the media, with more access to more players than ever before. Today, we talk with Christian Datoc, the White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, about how that fundamentally changes the way Americans are getting their news and reacting to it. From Ballard Studios today in Tampa, Florida, it's 13th and Park.
The hard things that are necessary, we either do it or we'll pay the price down the road.
That often is missing in politics.
We have to solve everything.
It's a nightmare.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
I have faith in the American people.
Those are the facts.
The Illuminati right there. Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
We went from North Korea to Eminem. That's a lot, man.
What's in this tea?
Well, Christian, great to have you on the show today. Clearly, a number of world leaders have come to meet with Trump. This seems to be part of a strategy that President Biden, frankly, did not do. I think his first world leader came in like April. Do you think this kind of stage, which, as you know, the president likes the stage, is really going to play effectively into what he's trying to achieve in foreign policy?
It will definitely have an impact, but I think it's really necessary when you look at what they're doing in terms of trade and what the Trump administration is doing in putting these reciprocal tariffs on. It sort of precipitates a natural dialogue. And so we saw Keir Starmer here on Thursday and Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday. Obviously, the EU is a big focus of these tariffs. And while the overarching narrative of that visit was ending the war in Ukraine, tariffs and trade were certainly a hot topic on the agenda. So I think it's smart for President Trump to welcome these world leaders in. It also, let's be honest, started before he entered the White House. I mean, Starmer and others like Zelensky, they traveled down to Mar-a-Lago before January 20th to kiss the ring, so to speak, and try and ingratiate themselves to the new, or I guess returning executive, because it is true that Trump's foreign policy does look very different than former President Biden's. It's still early days, and this sort of cadence and frequency with which these visits are occurring could change. But I do think it's probably a smart, conscious decision from the Trump White House to roll this out so early.
So to quote the headline on that piece you did recently, you said, America is back, the inside strategy behind Trump's world leader parade. But I'm really focused on the words, America is back. Talk about that.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the overriding mission statement, more or less. If the Trump 1.0 administration were trying to make America great again, this administration is saying, yeah, we're back and we're already open for business. And it's very similar to how, President Trump operated in the business world, right? He isn't someone who is secluded in his office. He's out and mixing it up. And, he views himself as the top negotiator. Now, he does have a number of trusted deputies this time around, whether it's Steve Witkoff regarding the Middle East or Keith Kellogg in Ukraine. And of course, you've got J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth heading over to Munich and address the security conference there to not only sort of set anxieties at ease regarding the president's plan for ending the war in Ukraine, but also to remind them, hey, we expect you, NATO allies, to bump up your defense commitments. That's certainly been sort of a secondary point that both Starmer and Macron made. Europe wants the U.S. to act as a defense backup for any peacekeeping operations after the war ends. And Donald Trump is basically saying, look, this is a European problem. You need to shoulder the burden. I'm happy to come in and bring these two sides together. But look, my thoughts haven't changed from the first time around. Europe needs to protect Europe. If there is a direct attack on a NATO ally, yes, I like Article 5 and we will come to your aid. But Ukraine isn't in NATO right now. And it seems like Donald Trump isn't going to push for admission like President Biden was as well. So the world leader parade, to get back to your question, I mean, I just think it's a conscious strategy. And it's not just in IR or on trade. I mean, the Trump White House, this team, they've had 4 years to really perfect their playbook. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the press right now, the Trump administration back in 2018, they tried to bar reporters from entering the White House grounds. That went up to the Supreme Court and they lost that case. So now they're saying, okay, let's look at the mistakes we made the first time around. Our policy agenda has not shifted substantively, but the way they're approaching it, the strategy has definitely been honed and fine-tuned, and it looks like they're ready to hit the ground running.
So, Christian, having come from the Daily Caller, now the correspondent for the Washington Examiner, conservative media, How is it a different role right now for conservative media versus mainstream media in this new administration? And what is it like in the White House press briefing room? I mean, in this kind of new environment where there's a total embrace of different kinds of media, more so than I think at any time in our lifetime.
There's definitely a lot of tension, not only between the press and the White House, but sort of conservative media, like you put it, and some of these more establishment legacy media types. And I do think the developments we've had, not only with the AP losing in court and attempting to be pushed back into the Oval Office and be part of that pool, but the announcements that Caroline Levitt made about how the WHCA, the White House Correspondents Association, which has maintained the presidential pool for, roughly a century, they're no longer in control. The White House is going to determine who is allowed in and who is kept out. It's an issue that I find, kind of concerning, to be quite honest, because we're flirting up with infringing on freedom of the press. It's right there in the Constitution. And like I mentioned just a second ago, the Trump administration seems to have planned this strategy out in a way where it won't get them in legal trouble. Now, I do believe there's sort of a game of chicken going on between Trump and the press. They're trying to control language regarding the Gulf of America / Gulf of Mexico. They're trying to say, hey, we can bully you into doing what we want, covering what we want. Otherwise, we're just not going to let you into the events. We're going to allow you on campus because that's your constitutional right, but you're not going to have access. So hinging back to your original question, it's a great time to be in conservative media. I pride myself on, having friends and sources on both sides of the aisle. I think I developed a pretty good Rolodex during the Biden administration of Democratic strategists and lawmakers. But just being at a conservative magazine, even though all of our policy coverage team isn't necessarily a diehard conservative or a registered Republican, it's a boon. I'm not going to lie. And this is an issue that other conservative organizations, whether it's Fox News or the Daily Signal, people who've been in the pool forever, or now they're a part of this new media pool that the White House is standing up. That's like a business and an editorial decision that they are all having to make on their own. Do we want to work with the White House in making sure voters and everyday Americans can see what's happening behind closed doors? Or are we going to stand with the WHCA and essentially protest and, take our ball and go home because we're not playing the game we want to play it?
Well, you've seen, in the campaign itself, 24, President Trump really decided to go at it differently. Alternative media, the Rogan show got a lot of play and other things. And even just the 1 hour he spent on CBS in that interview one-on-one. That's extraordinary access, Christian, when you think about it. This isn't like we're going to control how much time the president's on or not. He wants to engage, but it looks like to the American public, he's engaging differently. Isn't that kind of an interesting dynamic coming out of the last presidency, where clearly at times there was an attempt to control all access for fear that the president maybe wasn't up to the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the strategies couldn't be more different between President Trump and President Biden. Obviously, Biden's team thought that their best plan of attack was to keep President Biden out of the public eye as much as possible. I think we can all say now that that was the wrong strategy. I mean, I would argue President Biden's strengths are his sort of everyday, regular guy type appeal. He could talk to somebody about baseball or, who's in the Super Bowl or having a beer, even if he, doesn't drink. He just sort of has that appeal. He's not a policy wonk.
Yeah.
And I think his team did him a disservice by pursuing that strategy. Now, let's talk about Trump for a second, because you are right. His sort of approach with the media is very different to his approach during round one. And it's not just the frequency that he's speaking with us. There's no more 3 a.m. tweets, which I'm very thankful for, to be honest. Yeah, I feel like I'm not seeing my wife enough over these last 2 months or so. And it's nice to have nights to ourselves at least. But just sort of the tenor with which he's speaking, and I'm generalizing, obviously he's broken this from a little bit. He seems more collected. I agree. He does seem to be generally more focused on policy rather than some of these culture war issues, which sort of dominated the final years of his first term. And he sort of credits that to the Butler assassination attempt. I mean, I heard him talk about it in the final months of the campaign. And even during his first couple of speeches here in Washington in January, he says he's a changed man. And it seems like in the early days, he has evolved to a degree. I'm not going to say he's like a totally different person and he's focused on different issues or, has different ideas in his head about how the country should be run. But at least in terms of his claim that he wants to be a unifier, wants to be a peacemaker, I think there is some weight to it. Now, it's up to President Trump himself to see if he can carry that over the entirety of these 4 years. But the first month, 6 weeks or so in office, it seems like that certainly holds true in my eyes, at least.
So obviously a lot of headlines have been generated for all the obvious reasons by Elon Musk, who I describe as the lightning rod to the president, who is the lightning, right? So how is that being read? Because the bottom line is he's trying to help the president redefine the way government does business.
I think it depends on who you ask, even on the right side of the aisle. Let's be honest. Like yourself, I've spoken to a number of conservative operatives or strategists, even lawmakers, who they think, Elon Musk is basically acting as a human meat shield for Donald Trump. And he is essentially trying to take the fire for what Doge is doing, which, let's be honest, is wildly popular with the majority of American voters. That being said, when you look at the potential rift between Mr. Musk and the president, I do think there is a little bit of truth to that as well. Will Donald Trump hold on and allow Elon to take the spotlight and field questions from reporters in the Oval Office while he's sitting there silently for 20 minutes or so? I'm not so sure Donald Trump will put up with that for forever. But as it stands right now, the majority of America outside of the Beltway and these federal workers who are being directly impacted by Doge's quest to cut federal bureaucracy and spending, I think it's playing extraordinarily well. And for that reason, Donald Trump has a lot of skin in the game, and he wants to keep Elon around to act as that shield or to act as the lightning rod for the media, the way you put it.
Well, Christian, beyond the visit by President Zelensky, what other issue are you tracking that really has caught your attention?
I hate to talk about something we've already discussed, Adam, but I really do think it's the tariff agenda. Donald Trump has been negotiating with Prime Minister Trudeau and President Sheinbaum about, working together to address not only illegal immigration, but the fentanyl trade. And when you talk about those negotiations, there is progress on the border. The Trump administration is saying that's because of our policies, but there needs to be more when it comes to fentanyl. Because we still have this overdose problem, we have this epidemic, we can't say that there has been sufficient progress. Now, there is another player who's involved here, and that's, of course, China. Donald Trump had originally put 10% tariffs on all imports coming from the CCP, and he doubled that again because of the lack of progress regarding the war on fentanyl. That being said, there's a whole bunch of other tariffs that are coming down the pipe that will be announced in April. It's this reciprocal agenda that I touched on earlier, and it will impact not only strategic frenemies like China, but very close allies, be it the United Kingdom or the European Union. These are countries who are going to have to change the way their fiscal policy revolves around the United States. Peter Navarro, his top trade advisor here at the White House, Jameson Greer, USTR, and of course, Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick over at Treasury and Commerce. They are gung-ho about not only installing these tariffs, and they can be flat on countries as part of their reciprocal agenda, or targeting specific sectors, whether it's automobiles or pharmaceuticals. They want this to go forward because they're saying, look, the United States has been taken advantage of for the better part of the last 40 years. We don't need to necessarily get these countries to drop their barrier taxes on us. We need to reform the way the entire global economy operates so that we don't get in this position again moving forward when there's a different president in office. Because let's be honest, it's the economy, stupid. It all, comes down to however much money people have in their pocketbooks. Now, I will say this could sort of blow up in the Trump administration's face if their gamble does lead to significant decreases in consumer consumption, increases in prices for everyday Americans. And the most important factor for Donald Trump, not necessarily the actual economic data, but it's the public polling. His approval rating is virtually at its highest at any point in his political career. And if people start thinking, hey, his plan to address inflation is actually working in the opposite, I don't think he's going to have, an extended honeymoon period that Joe Biden saw. Let's not forget, Joe Biden's approvals were sky high through August of his first term in office. And of course, it was the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan that sent him underwater. The inflation and the impact that his tariff agenda will have on everyday American households, I think that could be either a huge boost for the president or something that sends him back down south to the 30s, maybe even the 20s, where he ended his first term in office.
Christian, the president is very fond of the word deal. Everything's kind of making a deal. Yeah. This seemingly plays directly into what he's trying to achieve with tariffs. Is that a fair way to look at it?
In a manner of speaking, I do. Obviously, it's more intricate because of all of the moving parts than just, a simple real estate deal, let's be honest. But that's certainly his ethos in approaching these issues. And it's not just trade. I mean, look at how he's handling the war in Ukraine. He basically went in and brought Putin back to the negotiating table when he had been left on the complete outside by President Joe Biden. I'm not saying I think I would have acted any differently than Biden did, but it's a clear strategic shift. And he is embracing Zelensky in the same way. The president thinks he's the best negotiator in the world. That certainly hasn't changed compared to 2017 to 2020. And I do think that's virtually how he approaches every single issue. And it's not just IR. Again, that's how he's wrangling the House and Senate Republican caucuses on advancing his appropriations bill. It's how he's sort of embracing Democrats like John Fetterman. It's all about making a deal with Donald Trump. And right now he has the political capital and the public goodwill to just about get any deal that he wants done.
Well, right behind you can see the beginning signs of spring. Spring means baseball. I remember reading you played baseball at Furman. We'll talk about that in another episode. I'm glad that you're on the scene. I'm really happy that there's a sense in this country that things are moving in a different direction. I think that your reporting and people like you are critical for people understanding kind of what the bottom lines are. And of course, now that we're into Trump too, it's nice to know also your wife won't have to worry about the 3 a.m. tweets anymore.
You're telling me, man. Yeah.
Take care of yourself. Best of luck. And thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam. Anytime.